It began with a single phone call, a whisper she was never meant to hear. In a mansion glittering with lies, a 19-year-old girl uncovers the truth. Her parents plan to kill her grandfather for inheritance. But when the night of revenge turns to judgment, every secret bleeds under candlelight, and love, finally, learns the cost of truth.
Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
My name is Claire. I'm 19 years old. And what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. Seattle has a way of swallowing sound, rain tapping on glass, the hum of traffic, the quiet ache of pretending everything's fine. On most nights, that sound wrapped around the house like a blanket. That winter night, it felt more like a warning. Our house shimmered like a showroom. The marble floors gleamed, the chandeliers glowed, and the air smelled of pine and expensive candles. My mother said it made the house feel warm. It didn't. It just smelled like effort. I sat halfway down the staircase, wrapped in one of my father's sweaters, listening to the hollow rhythm of our perfect home. Somewhere in the distance, the dishwasher hummed and muted, Christmas music played from a speaker in the kitchen, all background noise in a life built on appearances. From the outside, we were the Morgans, polished, envied, untouchable. Inside, we were just tired actors trapped in a show no one remembered auditioning for. Sometimes I wondered if anyone in this house even knew who they were when the lights were off and the guests went home, or if we only existed in reflections and photographs. My eyes drifted toward the family portrait on the wall. We looked happy. My mother's perfect hair, my father's proud grin, me with a smile I'd practiced more times than I'd meant to. The photographer had said, "Think of something that makes you feel loved." I'd thought of silence. I reached up and touched the photo. The glass was cold, colder than it should have been. For a second, I imagined it cracking beneath my fingers, the frozen smile splintering into pieces. Maybe that would have been more honest than the version of us hanging there, framed and dusted every week like something sacred. The phone on the side table buzzed. "Dad." I hesitated, then answered. "Claire." His voice was brisk. "Make sure everything's ready for tomorrow. The old man's coming early." The old man. That's what he called his father. My grandfather, Arthur Morgan. 72, widowed, still sending handwritten letters and believing in integrity like it was currency. "I will," I said softly. He was about to hang up, but didn't. There was a faint shuffle, and then her voice, my mother's, smooth, careful, and sharp as glass. "That old man won't last a day after our Christmas surprise." For a moment, my heart stopped. I stared into nothing, waiting for a laugh, a punchline, anything to make it less real. But my father's voice followed, calm and deliberate. "Laura, we shouldn't talk about this where anyone can hear." "Oh, please," she said, her tone coated in sugar. "She's probably asleep. Tomorrow we smile, toast, and it's done. You'll finally be free of him." The air left my body all at once. The phone trembled in my hand. My pulse roared in my ears. I couldn't breathe. My parents, my own parents, were planning something against him. Against the man who'd built everything they had. My skin went cold. I pressed the phone tighter, hoping I'd misheard, that the rain outside had twisted their words. But then my father spoke again. "He trusts us, Laura. It'll be clean. No suspicion." "Good," she whispered. "I want this over. I'm tired of playing daughter-in-law to a ghost." The world tilted. The chandelier lights blurred. I dropped the phone onto the carpet and backed away, as if their voices could burn. Nausea clawed at my throat. I thought about the man who used to lift me onto his shoulders to watch fireworks, who taught me chess because he said life was too cruel to play checkers. The idea that someone could want to harm him, that my parents could, felt impossible. And yet the truth had a voice. I'd just heard it. When my shaking finally stopped, I picked the phone back up and called him. Arthur M. He answered after 2 rings. Claire, he said gently. You sound frightened. Hearing his voice almost broke whatever was left of my composure. It carried the warmth of old stories and summer visits, of afternoons where time moved slower and no one was pretending. My voice cracked. Grandpa, please listen. I heard them. Dad and Mom. They said something awful. You can't come tomorrow. Please don't. There was a pause. His tone shifted, deepened. Don't worry, my dear, I'll be there. No, you don't understand. I'll be there, he repeated, steady and calm. And I won't come alone. The line went dead. I stood in the silence, holding the phone like it still had his heartbeat inside it. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. Inside, everything looked the same, polished, glowing, but I saw it now for what it really was, a stage before the fall. I pressed my forehead to the glass. My breath fogged, then faded. I whispered, please don't come. But he would. I knew him. The night stretched endlessly. I couldn't sleep. Their voices echoed in my head. My mother's quiet cruelty, my father's greed, the way they said surprise, like a gift. I sat on the stairs until dawn, until the house softened from gold to gray. By morning, I felt hollow. The girl in the mirror looked familiar but distant, like someone I used to be. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but something inside me had shifted. A spark of fear turned into steel. Whatever my parents were planning, Grandpa Arthur knew, and he wasn't coming to celebrate Christmas. He was coming to end the illusion we'd all been living in. That night, before I forced myself to smile, before I stepped back into the performance, I whispered one last promise into the empty house. Whatever happens tomorrow, Grandpa, I'll protect you, even if it means destroying everything else. The morning after that call felt unreal, like I'd woken inside someone else's life. The house gleamed brighter than usual, as if it were trying too hard to look innocent. The scent of cinnamon candles mixed with furniture polish hung in the air, thick enough to make me nauseous. My mother was in the living room, arranging ornaments with surgical precision. Her reflection in the mirror looked peaceful, if you didn't know her well enough to see how cold that piece really was. Claire, she said, without turning, make sure your dress for tonight is pressed. Your grandfather always notices the smallest things. My throat tightened at the word grandfather. I managed a nod, keeping my face still. She didn't notice the tremor in my hands. Or maybe she did, and simply didn't care. Upstairs, I found my father pacing in his office, talking into his phone. He sounded like a man who'd already decided how the world should unfold. No, it has to be tomorrow. He's expecting family, not business. That's the whole point. He paused, listening. I'll handle it. You just make sure the paperwork's ready. Paperwork. The word stuck in my mind like a splinter. I backed away before he saw me. Every creak of the hallway floorboards felt like an alarm. I returned to my room, shut the door, and sank onto the bed. My heart thudded against my ribs, a reminder that I still hadn't escaped this house. Or them. When you grow up around ambition, you learn that silence is currency. No one here shouted or slammed doors. They smiled. They negotiated. They destroyed quietly. My father had once been charming, brilliant, the man everyone wanted to shake hands with. Then came the debts. Whispered scandals, bad investments, desperate loans. My mother, Laura, had filled the cracks with champagne dinners and charity galas. Together they built a beautiful lie, and I had been part of its decor. I used to believe there was still love buried beneath all that ambition, but now I knew. It wasn't love holding them together. It was greed. That afternoon, I found the courage to open the door I'd avoided my whole life, my father's office. He wasn't home yet, and the silence there felt heavy. The blinds were drawn, the faint smell of cigars lingering in the air. I walked to his desk, my footsteps barely whispering on the carpet. I opened the top drawer. Contracts, receipts, letters, all stacked with surgical neatness. Then, buried beneath a folder marked Morgan Holdings, I found a document titled Property Transfer Agreement. My chest tightened as I read the names. Arthur Morgan, transferor. Michael Morgan, transferee. The paper trembled in my hands. There it was. Proof. Whatever they planned for Christmas wasn't just emotional. It was financial, calculated, deliberate. The signatures were blank, but the intent was written in every line. A sound from the hallway. The click of heels. My mother. I shoved the folder back, closed the drawer, and turned just as she appeared in the doorway. "Darling," she said, smiling, "you look pale. Are you feeling all right?" I forced a smile. "Just tired." She tilted her head, eyes soft but sharp. "You worry too much. Your father and I have everything under control." The way she said it, under control, made my skin crawl. That night, I sat in the dim light of my room, staring at my phone. My hands hovered over the screen before I finally typed a message. "Please don't come tomorrow. It's not safe." I hit send. The reply came almost instantly. "Arthur Morgan. I told you, my dear. I'll be there, and I won't come alone." His calmness frightened me more than anything. It felt like the stillness before thunder. Downstairs, laughter erupted. My parents, practicing warmth for tomorrow. I could almost script the evening. Champagne, small talk, my mother's glittering smile as she poured drinks. All of it choreographed, rehearsed. And somewhere in that performance, a plan to destroy the man who gave them everything. Lying in bed, I replayed every memory I had of Grandpa Arthur. The quiet strength in his hands, the patience in his eyes. After Grandma died, he'd grown quieter, lonelier. My parents had taken that weakness as invitation. They'd planned to lure him here, to use family as bait. I could almost hear them laughing about it. Tears stung my eyes, not from fear this time, but from shame. I was his granddaughter, and yet I'd been living in their house, breathing their poison, pretending not to see. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The clock ticked past midnight, every second dragging like a confession. Somewhere between exhaustion and rage, I made a silent vow. If they were going to turn this Christmas into a trap, then I would be the one to change how the story ended. When dawn broke, I went downstairs. The table was already set. Crystal glasses, silver cutlery, napkins folded into perfect triangles. My mother stood by the window, admiring her reflection in the glass. My father checked his watch, the faint gleam of excitement in his eyes. "Everything's perfect," she said. "Yes," he replied, "almost too perfect." They smiled at each other, a smile that could have frozen water. I stood there, watching them. For the first time, I realized that the word family could mean something poisonous, a cage gilded with love and lies. I didn't say a word. I just kept my mask on, because in this house, masks weren't lies. They were survival. As I turned away, a small voice in my mind whispered the truth I was finally ready to face. This wasn't a family anymore. It was a crime scene waiting for the lights to dim. Christmas Eve arrived dressed in perfection. The house glowed like a photograph from a lifestyle magazine. Garlands hung over doorways, candles flickered in glass holders, the smell of baked cinnamon lingered like a promise. If you didn't look too closely, you could almost believe it was real. Almost. My mother floated around the living room, giving orders with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Claire, darling, could you fluff those pillows? The camera crew from the charity event might stop by later." She said it as if her entire identity depended on how a stranger might judge our couch cushions. My father stood near the fireplace, phone in hand, whispering into it between sips of whiskey. His reflection flickered in the flames, one side warm, the other cold. They called it family tradition. I called it theater. I moved quietly through the room, a ghost in my own house. Every ornament, every ribbon, every carefully wrapped gift felt like part of a script. Props for a play where love was performed on cue. Somewhere between the smell of pine and the weight of silence, I realized that my fear had turned into grief. Not for what was coming, but for what had already died. At 19, you shouldn't have to mourn your family while they're still alive. Dinner preparations filled the afternoon. I watched my mother stir a pot of mulled wine, humming softly to herself. "He'll love this," she said, meaning my grandfather. Her tone was too sweet to trust. "Mom," I asked quietly, "why are we really inviting him this year?" She looked up, startled for a heartbeat, then smiled. "Because it's Christmas, dear, and family deserves to be together." I wanted to ask what she meant by deserves, but I already knew. When she left the kitchen, I lingered behind, staring at the half-empty bottle of wine and the small vial sitting beside it. My pulse quickened. It wasn't labeled. It didn't need to be. That night, as snow began to fall outside, I found myself standing in front of my father's office again. The door was locked. He always locked it before bed, as if the truth might try to escape. I remembered the document I'd seen. Property transfer agreement. Something inside me burned to know more. I grabbed the small key I'd seen him toss carelessly onto the hall table earlier, slid it into the lock, and turned it. The door creaked open. The air inside was still and heavy. Papers, ledgers, letters, all perfectly aligned. My eyes scanned the desk until I saw a folder labeled Morgan Estate Transition Plan. My stomach turned. I opened it. Inside were drafts of legal documents, bank records, and notes in my father's handwriting. Phrases like asset consolidation post-mortem and immediate authority transfer jumped out like daggers. Then, near the bottom, I found a single page handwritten by my mother. "After the signature, administer the dose within the first toast. Timing matters." I dropped the paper as if it were burning me. My heart raced so hard it drowned out thought. That was the moment I knew. They weren't just plotting. They were ready. I stumbled back, closing the drawer quietly, and forced myself to breathe. My hands were shaking so badly I had to hold them against the desk to stop them. I left the office, closed the door, and ran to my room. The air felt thin, the walls too close. I texted him again. "My grandfather. Don't come. Please. They're serious. It's dangerous." The reply came slower this time. "Arthur Morgan. I told you once, Claire. Let them play their part. So will we." I stared at the message until the words blurred. So will we. It sounded like he already knew what awaited him, like he'd been expecting this storm all along. I sat on my bed, clutching my phone, tears burning behind my eyes. Somewhere in the house, laughter echoed, the sound of my parents clinking glasses, rehearsing affection. It made me feel sick. When I was younger, I used to believe that family meant safety, that no matter how loud the world became, home was where the noise stopped. But tonight, home was the noise. Every whisper, every lie, every forced smile screamed louder than thunder. I looked out the window. Snow fell in thick, lazy flakes, covering everything in white, pure, deceptive, forgiving. I wondered if forgiveness ever came that easily. Then I heard my mother's voice down the hall, calling out, "Claire, honey, don't forget to smile tomorrow. Your grandfather adores you. You're his favorite." I froze. It wasn't just a reminder, it was an instruction. She was telling me to play my role, the sweet granddaughter, the perfect distraction. I was part of their plan, whether I liked it or not. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling my heart beat faster, heavier. Tomorrow, I'd have to sit at that table, smile across the candles, and pour the glass that might kill him. But maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't go the way they thought. Because while they were scripting a tragedy, I was starting to understand something deeper. Truth has a way of finding its moment. And when it doesn't whisper. It roars. Christmas morning arrived too quietly. The snow outside was clean and soft, blanketing the city in false serenity. Inside our house, everything glittered. The tree, the crystal glasses, the smiles that didn't belong to us. The smell of roasted meat and vanilla candles mixed into something heavy, almost suffocating. I sat by the window for a long time, watching the gray sky. The reflection of my face on the glass looked calm, but my hands betrayed me. Trembling, restless, waiting. It wasn't fear anymore. It was anticipation. I'd stopped pretending that this was a family gathering. Today was an execution dressed as a holiday. Downstairs, my mother's voice floated through the hall, melodic and practiced. "Claire, sweetheart, remember, you'll pour the first glass for your grandfather. He trusts you. He'll like that." Her words sank into me like ice. She said it so gently, so lovingly, as though she were teaching me how to be kind, not how to betray. I walked into the kitchen. She was arranging plates, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Mom," I said quietly, "why do you need me to pour it?" She smiled without looking up. "Because, darling, sincerity matters. When people believe they're loved, they don't see the knife." The room spun for a moment. I turned away before she could see my face. In the living room, my father stood near the fireplace, polishing his watch, humming softly. The same man who once told me that life rewards those who take what they deserve. His calmness made me sick. He looked like a man preparing for victory, not for a crime. I walked past him without speaking. He didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. At noon, the doorbell rang. A sound so ordinary, yet it made the air crack like thunder. My heart stopped. My mother's heels clicked against the floor as she went to open the door. "Smile," she whispered to me as she passed. The door swung open. Grandpa Arthur stood there, tall and composed in his gray coat, snowflakes melting in his silver hair. Behind him were two figures, a woman in a sharp black suit and a man with eyes that missed nothing. "Laura," he said softly, stepping inside. "Michael." My parents froze for half a breath before their practiced warmth took over. "Father," my dad said, voice slick as oil. "We're so glad you came." Arthur smiled, that small, knowing smile that made you feel like he already saw through everything. I wouldn't miss it for the world. His gaze flicked toward me, gentle but steady. Then he nodded, barely noticeable, but I understood. He knows. The woman behind him introduced herself as Charlotte Hale, his attorney. The man, Ethan Brooks, was a family friend, though everything about him, his posture, his silent attention, said otherwise. My mother's lips twitched, just slightly. "Security? For Christmas dinner?" she asked, half laughing. Arthur's eyes didn't. "Leave hers. You can never be too careful with family." The air thinned. No one spoke for a long moment. Then my mother recovered, ushering everyone toward the dining room, her voice sweet again. "Let's not keep the food waiting." I followed, my legs heavy as lead. The table looked like something from a magazine. Gold-trimmed plates, candles, a centerpiece of white roses. I took my seat across from my grandfather. He gave me that same faint nod, as if to say, "Steady now." When my mother lifted the bottle of wine, I felt the world slow. "Claire, darling," she said, "pour your grandfather's glass. He's always loved your touch." My hand reached out automatically, trained obedience, but Arthur's voice cut through the air, calm, commanding. "Let me do it, Claire." He stood, taking the bottle from my mother's hand with surprising ease. "Old habits die hard," he said, smiling faintly. He filled his glass, then another. My father's. I saw it then, that subtle flicker in his eyes as he switched the glasses, his movements deliberate yet natural, like a magician hiding a card in plain sight. He lifted his own glass, looked at me, and gave the smallest wink. My throat tightened. We toasted. "To family." The words tasted bitter. My mother beamed. My father drank. I didn't. I couldn't. The entire room felt like it was holding its breath. Dinner began, full of small talk and brittle laughter. My parents played their parts beautifully, the devoted son, the gracious hostess. But beneath it, something simmered. Grandpa Arthur let them speak, occasionally nodding, occasionally cutting through their words with quiet questions that sounded harmless but weren't. "How's business, Michael? Still as unpredictable as ever?" My father's fork paused mid-air. "We've had some challenges," he said carefully. Arthur smiled. "Yes, I imagine debt can be a challenge." The silence that followed was sharper than any blade. My mother tried to deflect. "Father, we didn't invite you here to talk about business." "Of course not," he said, his tone mild. "We're here to celebrate. To be a family." He said the word family like a test, and I could feel my mother failing it in real time. Through it all, Charlotte and Ethan remained silent, observing, their presence steady, like witnesses waiting for the confession to begin. After dessert, the storm outside began to grow. Wind against windows, thunder rolling somewhere far off. The candles flickered, shadows dancing across faces that had worn too many masks. Arthur set down his glass. "You've outdone yourselves," he said quietly. "A beautiful dinner." My father smiled. "Only the best for you." Arthur's gaze didn't waver. "Of course. After all, you never know which meal might be your last." The room froze. The clock ticked once, then twice. For a moment, I thought my father might speak, might deny, might laugh it off. But he didn't. He just stared at the glass in his hand, the one he thought had belonged to Arthur. And that's when I realized the calm wasn't over. It had just broken. The world outside had gone white. Snow kept falling in silent sheets, muffling the city, turning everything into a picture that looked peaceful if you didn't know better. But inside the Morgan house, peace was just another illusion. I woke before dawn, unable to sleep. The air felt charged, like the seconds before lightning strikes. Downstairs, I could hear my mother humming, the clink of glass, the measured tone in her voice as she gave orders to the catering staff. My father's voice joined hers, low and deliberate. They were rehearsing control. Two performers perfecting their last act. By noon, everything sparkled. The lights, the table, their smiles. Even I looked the part. The good daughter in a pale blue dress. The one my mother chose because it makes you look trustworthy. If she only knew how much I'd stopped being that. The doorbell rang at exactly 6. My heart tripped. My mother's eyes met mine for a moment. Polished, expectant. "Showtime," she whispered. She opened the door. Grandpa Arthur stood there, the snow still clinging to his shoulders like armor. Behind him, two silhouettes stepped into the light. A woman, tall, composed, wrapped in a black coat. She carried herself like someone used to being obeyed. And a man, broad-shouldered, with that quiet alertness of someone who'd seen too much and trusted too little. "Laura," my grandfather said, smiling faintly. "Michael." The air shifted. My father froze for half a breath before recovering. "Father," he said smoothly. "Merry Christmas. You made it." "I always do," Arthur replied, stepping forward. "This is Miss Charlotte Hale, my attorney, and this is Ethan Brooks, head of security." The word security landed like a stone in water. My mother's smile faltered. "Security? For Christmas dinner?" Arthur's tone stayed gentle, but his eyes were glacial. "You can never be too careful with family." Ethan's gaze swept the room, quiet, unreadable. Charlotte simply offered a polite nod, her presence filling the space like an unsaid truth. My mother hesitated, then laughed softly. Too high, too controlled. "Of course. The more, the merrier." We all moved toward the dining room. The chandelier above the table shimmered like 1,000 watching eyes. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. As we took our seats, Arthur's attention settled on me. "You've grown, Claire," he said, smiling warmly. "You remind me of your grandmother when she was your age." Something in his tone almost broke me. I forced a smile, fighting the urge to warn him again. But his eyes told me he already knew. Dinner began. Silverware clinked. The conversation danced around weather, charity, business. Anything but the truth. My father played his part beautifully, laughing at the right moments, pretending not to notice the way Arthur studied him with patient curiosity. Then came the wine. My mother lifted the bottle, with grace, and said, "Claire, darling, pour for your grandfather. You have the softest hands." My heart slammed against my ribs. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then, before I could reach for the bottle, Arthur's voice broke the rhythm. "Allow me," he said. He stood, took the bottle from my mother's hand, and began to pour. He filled his glass first, then my father's, then my mother's. When he sat down again, I saw it. That tiny, deliberate switch of glasses. A magician's gesture, smooth and untraceable. He lifted his glass. "To family," he said. My parents echoed, "To family." The words tasted like poison. Dinner continued. The clinking of forks against porcelain grew sharper, like distant thunder. Arthur spoke sparingly, but every question cut deeper than it seemed to. "How's business, Michael? Still chasing fortune?" My father laughed thinly. "Always. You taught me that, remember?" "I taught you to build," Arthur said, "not to take." The silence after that was heavy enough to crush. My mother cleared her throat, smiling too brightly. "Father, you really should try the roast. Claire helped prepare it." He nodded, slicing his portion with calm precision. "Delicious," he said softly. "It's good to see this family working together again." Charlotte's gaze flicked toward him, subtle but meaningful. Ethan stayed quiet, his eyes scanning every face. Minutes passed, like hours. My father's smile began to tremble. Sweat gathered along his temple. His hand, still holding the wine glass, started to shake. "Are you all right?" my mother asked, her voice too calm. He blinked rapidly, confusion spreading across his face. "Just tired," he muttered, pressing a hand to his forehead. Arthur set down his fork, his expression unreadable. "You should rest," he said gently. "You've been carrying too much weight for too long." My mother's voice cracked for the first time. What's happening?" Arthur leaned back, his tone almost tender. "Don't worry, it's not poison, just something mild. A pause. Let's say. A chance to listen." The room went still. Ethan stood, moving quietly to close the dining room doors. Charlotte opened a slim folder and placed it on the table beside the untouched dessert. Her voice was calm, professional. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, my name is Charlotte Hale. I represent Mr. Arthur Morgan in all matters concerning the Morgan Trust. You may want to hear what's next." My mother stared, pale and silent. My father struggled to speak but could only manage a rasp. Arthur's eyes met mine. Steady, kind. "It's all right, Claire," he said softly. "You did what you had to do." Tears burned behind my eyes. I wanted to speak, to apologize, to scream, but he shook his head slightly as if to say, "Not yet." Outside, thunder cracked. The first real sound after hours of tension. Inside, everything began to unravel. Arthur turned to them, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that filled the room. "You invited me here to end my life," he said, "but tonight I came to end a lie." The candles flickered, casting long shadows across the table. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't a dinner. It was judgment. The sound of the clock was deafening. Tick, tick, tick. Each second dragged through the air like a slow cut. My father sat slumped in his chair, pale and sweating, his hand trembling against the polished wood. My mother's lips moved soundlessly, shock frozen into elegance. Across from them, Grandpa Arthur was calm. Too calm. His eyes gleamed with something between sorrow and resolve. Ethan stood behind him like a silent sentinel. Charlotte Hale, the attorney, adjusted the folder she had placed neatly in front of her. It wasn't dinner anymore. It was judgment disguised as a meal. My mother was the first to break the silence. "What have you done?" Her voice cracked. "What's in that drink?" Arthur's voice was soft, deliberate. "A sedative. Nothing lethal. I don't kill my family, Laura. I let them live with what they've done." Her breath hitched. "You're insane." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm just tired of pretending that kindness fixes corruption." I sat frozen, my fingers digging into the edge of the table. The candles flickered violently, the shadows on the walls shifting like ghosts. The taste of metal filled my mouth. My father tried to speak, his voice raspy. You set this up." Arthur leaned forward. "No, son, you did." He gestured lightly and Charlotte opened the folder. Paper rustled. Inside were copies of bank transfers, property drafts, recorded phone transcripts. Proof of everything. Charlotte spoke evenly. "These documents outline a planned transfer of the Morgan estate into private accounts under Michael Morgan and Laura Morgan. The plan was to execute it following Mr. Arthur Morgan's unexpected passing. Your words, not mine." My mother's face drained of color. "That's absurd." Ethan stepped forward and pressed a button on a small remote. A faint click. The TV on the far wall flickered to life. The voice that filled the room made my stomach twist. "That old man won't last a day after our Christmas surprise." My mother's voice. My father's reply followed, calm, casual. "Just make sure the paperwork's ready." It was the exact conversation I had heard that night, the one I was never meant to hear. The silence that followed felt alive, pulsing, heavy, inescapable. My father's chest heaved, his jaw tightening as he stared at the screen like it could rewrite itself. Then he turned his eyes on me. "You recorded us?" His voice was hoarse, venomous. "You betrayed your own family?" Tears burned behind my eyes, but I held his gaze. "No, Dad. I saved it." "Saved what?" My mother spat. "Your grandfather's money? His praise?" I shook my head slowly. "The only thing left worth saving? The truth." Arthur's voice cut through like glass. "Enough." He rose from his chair. His presence filled the room, commanding, unyielding. "You talk about betrayal, Michael. But what do you call plotting the death of your own father?" My father slammed his fist weakly against the table. "You never saw me, did you? You raised me like an employee, not a son. You worshipped money, not family." Arthur's expression softened, not with pity, but with grief. I built an empire so you would never know hunger. I taught you the value of work, not greed. You twisted that lesson into a weapon. My father's voice cracked. I just wanted to matter. Arthur's eyes glistened. Then you should have learned that love matters more than legacy. The words hung in the air. My mother looked away, her hands trembling as if the truth burned to touch. Arthur exhaled, his tone turning cold again. Charlotte. The lawyer stood, setting new papers on the table. Official documents stamped and signed. These declare the transfer of the Morgan Trust into the Arthur Foundation. Effective immediately, Claire Morgan will be placed as interim guardian. I blinked, stunned. Me? Arthur nodded slowly. You've seen the worst of this family, Claire. Now it's your turn to decide what comes next. My mother's laugh was sharp, bitter. You'd hand everything to a child? Arthur met her eyes. Better a child with a conscience than adults who've sold theirs. Thunder rumbled outside, shaking the windows. Ethan moved quietly to the curtains, drawing them open. The storm illuminated the room in flashes of white and blue. My father's breathing grew heavier. You think this fixes anything? You think she'll thank you when she realizes what you've done? Arthur's tone was final. This isn't about gratitude, it's about consequence. Then he turned to me, his voice lowering to something only I could hear. Sometimes justice looks cruel, Claire, but cruelty is what happens when love has been ignored too long. I felt something shift inside me, a strange mix of pride, sorrow, and fear. The man sitting across from me wasn't just my grandfather. He was the reckoning my parents had summoned without knowing. My father's head drooped, the sedative finally taking hold. My mother's tears streaked her makeup, her mask dissolving into something raw and broken. Arthur reached for his glass, raised it slightly, and said softly, "Merry Christmas." No one answered. He drank, then set the glass down with the quiet certainty of someone who had already made peace with the pain of truth. Outside, the storm began to fade, leaving only the faint hum of wind through the windows. Inside, I felt the weight of everything: betrayal, justice, blood, settling into stillness. And in that stillness, I understood the truth behind his calm. This was never revenge. It was restoration. But restoration, I was learning, always comes at a cost. For a long time, no one moved. The air in the dining room felt thick, heavy, like breathing inside a dream that wouldn't let you wake. The clock kept ticking, each sound louder than the last. The storm outside had quieted, but inside, it was only beginning. Arthur stood still at the head of the table, his hand resting lightly on the back of his chair. His face was calm, but I could see the tremor in his jaw. The kind that comes when a heart is breaking, but a man refuses to let it show. My father tried to straighten himself, blinking through the haze of the sedative. You think this changes anything?" he muttered. "Money, property, you can't erase blood." Arthur looked at him with something that almost resembled pity. "Blood means nothing if it carries no honor." My mother's eyes flicked toward me, wild and searching. "Claire, listen to me," she said softly, almost pleading. "You don't understand what he's doing. He's manipulating you, turning you against your own parents." I swallowed hard. The part of me that had always obeyed her wanted to look away, to pretend again. But another part, the one that had heard her laughter that night on the phone, refused. "You turned me against you the moment you planned to hurt him." Her expression cracked, her composure slipping like paint in the rain. "We did it for us, Claire, for our family, for your future." "My future?" My voice shook. "You were about to build my future on murder." She flinched as if I'd struck her. My father's breathing grew uneven, the color draining from his face. For the first time in my life, he looked small. Not powerful, not intimidating, just small. Arthur's voice filled the silence, deep and steady. You both built your lives on lies and debts. You taught my granddaughter that love was a transaction. Tonight, I'm giving her something you never could. The truth. He turned toward me then, his eyes softening. Claire, I'm sorry you had to be part of this. I should have seen sooner what they'd become. My throat tightened. I think part of me always knew. I just didn't want to believe it. He nodded slowly. Belief is comfortable, but truth makes you grow. Ethan stepped forward, placing a small recorder on the table. He pressed play. The room filled again with the sound of voices. My mother's, my father's. Plotting, laughing, conspiring. Each word felt like a nail sealing the coffin of everything I thought I knew. When it ended, silence followed. A silence so complete it almost rang in my ears. Then Arthur spoke, his voice cold as marble. The law will handle the rest. Charlotte has already filed the necessary petitions. You'll both be questioned by morning. My mother's breath came out in a shudder. You can't do this. I'm not doing anything, Arthur said quietly. You did. Her eyes burned into him, then into me. And you, she hissed. You stood there and let it happen. You think you're righteous, Claire? You're just like him. Cruel. Calculated. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't look away. Maybe, I said softly. But at least I'm not a coward. Arthur placed a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing. My mother laughed bitterly through her tears. Right? You call this right? Betraying your parents? I turned toward her. No. I betrayed what you became. There's a difference. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. The weight of her own choices hung between us, heavier than any words. Arthur's attention shifted back to my father. You always blamed me for your failures, Michael. But I never wanted to control you. I wanted to protect you. From yourself. My father's voice broke. You never gave me a chance to prove myself. You had every chance, Arthur said, his voice rising for the first time. But you confused power with purpose, and now you'll answer for it. He exhaled, the fury leaving him as quickly as it came. He turned toward me again. Claire, remember this. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about clarity. Seeing things as they are, not as we wish they were. I nodded, unable to speak. Charlotte stepped forward, her tone composed. Mr. Morgan, if you're ready, we should move them to the study. The authorities will arrive shortly. My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. No, she said. We'll leave. You'll regret this, Arthur. Ethan moved silently toward the door. You're not going anywhere, ma'am. The tension broke. My mother sank back into her chair, tears streaking down her face. My father stared blankly at the table, the glass of untouched wine trembling in his grip. Arthur turned to me once more. Go upstairs, Claire. You don't need to see the rest. But I couldn't move. My voice came out a whisper. If I walk away now, I'll never forget the sound of this moment. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw his strength falter. Then remember it, he said softly. Remember what truth costs, and why it's worth it. The lights flickered as thunder rolled again in the distance. The storm outside mirrored the one inside, both cleansing and cruel. Ethan guided my parents toward the hall while Charlotte followed with the documents. Arthur remained, standing by the window, staring into the snow. I walked to him slowly. Grandpa? He didn't turn. Do you hate them? He asked. I thought for a long time before answering. I don't know. Maybe I just pity them. He nodded. Pity is the beginning of forgiveness. Don't let hate take root where love once tried to grow. We stood there in silence, two survivors of the same wreckage. Behind us, the sound of the front door closing marked the end of something. A family, a lie, a world that no longer fit. As I looked at his reflection in the window, I realized the truth wasn't what destroyed us. It was what finally set us free. The morning after felt like the house had exhaled for the first time in years. The silence was no longer suffocating. It was clean, sharp, like the air after a storm, but beneath it lay the wreckage. I woke to the sound of footsteps downstairs, low voices, the rustle of papers. When I came down, Charlotte Hale was sitting at the dining table, the same table where everything had collapsed hours ago, with neat stacks of documents beside her. Ethan stood by the window, speaking softly into a radio. Arthur was there too. He looked tired in a way I'd never seen before, not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that comes from carrying a lifetime of disappointment. He turned when he saw me. "Good morning, Claire." "Morning," I whispered. My throat still felt raw. "Where are they?" He paused. "In the study. For now." I nodded, afraid to ask what came next. Charlotte looked up from her papers. "The police will arrive within the hour. Everything is prepared. Statements, evidence, financial records. Once it's done, there'll be no question who orchestrated this." Arthur's gaze stayed fixed on the snow outside. "There never was a question," he said quietly. The clock ticked in the corner. My hands trembled around the edge of my chair. I wanted to feel relief, but all I felt was hollow. Arthur noticed. "You did the right thing, Claire," he said gently. I shook my head. "It doesn't feel right." He smiled faintly. "That's how you know it is. Justice rarely feels like victory." The door to the study opened then, and my father stepped out. He looked older overnight, pale, sunken, stripped of the arrogance that had once filled every inch of him. My mother followed, her eyes red, her perfect hair slightly undone. For the first time, they looked human. Arthur faced them calmly. "It's time." My father's voice came out hoarse. "You've taken everything, haven't you? The company, the estate, even her." He glanced toward me, his eyes hollow. "You turned my daughter against me." Arthur didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between them said it all. My mother's voice was softer, but no less sharp. "We did what we thought we had to. You never believed in us. You never saw Michael as anything but a disappointment." Arthur's expression flickered with something like pain. "I saw a son who kept choosing shortcuts when he could have built something lasting." He stepped closer to them, his voice steady. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for truth. And the truth is, this family lost its soul long before tonight." Charlotte handed him a final set of documents. He slid them across the table toward my parents. "These are the official transfers. The Morgan estate is now under the Arthur Foundation. You're both removed as trustees, effective immediately." My father's jaw clenched. "You can't just erase us." Arthur's eyes hardened. "You erased yourselves the moment you chose greed over blood." He turned to me then, and the shift in his tone was so gentle it almost broke me. "Claire, from today forward, you're the custodian of this legacy. Use it to build, not destroy." I stared at him, stunned. "Me? I don't know how to—" He cut me off with a quiet smile. "You already do. You chose truth when you could have chosen comfort. That's all leadership really is." My mother's voice trembled. "You're giving everything to her? She's a child." Arthur looked at her. "She's the only adult in this room." For a long time, no one spoke. My father's breathing grew ragged. "You think this makes you noble, don't you? That you've taught her some lesson about morality. But one day, she'll hate you for this." Arthur met his gaze evenly. "If she hates me for teaching her honor, then I'll die proud." Then, slowly, he stepped back and gestured toward the untouched glasses from the night before. The ones still sitting where they'd been left. He picked one up, held it to the light, and said softly, "This was never poison, just a sedative. So you could feel what you made others feel. Powerless." He set it down. "Consider that your inheritance." A knock sounded at the door. Firm, official. The sound of engines outside followed. Ethan went to answer. Arthur turned to my parents. "The officers are here. Don't resist." My mother broke then, collapsing into tears. My father didn't move. He just stared straight ahead, the firelight glinting in his eyes like the remnants of pride that refused to die. When they led them out, the house seemed to exhale again. The sound of the front door closing was final, like the last chapter of a story too long delayed. Arthur walked slowly to the window, resting his hand on the glass. The morning sun was faint, silver, almost fragile. "It's over," he said softly. I stepped closer. "Is it?" He turned to me, his eyes heavy. "Justice is never the end, Claire. It's just the clearing before the rebuilding." I looked out at the snow, watching the tire tracks disappear as the police car turned the corner. "Then what happens now?" He smiled sadly. "Now, we start again. With truth." He moved to the table, picked up the folder Charlotte had left, and handed it to me. Inside was a single sheet. His will, newly signed. My name at the top. His signature beneath it. "Why me?" I asked. He looked at me with the same quiet pride I remembered from childhood. "Because you've seen what lies can do. And because I trust you to forgive without forgetting." My throat tightened. "I don't know if I can." "Then start by trying," he said. "That's how healing begins." We stood there for a moment, just the two of us, surrounded by the ghosts of what once was. The house felt different now. Lighter somehow, though. Nothing inside had changed. Arthur reached out and touched my shoulder. "Come, let's open the windows. Let the cold in. It's time the house learned how to breathe again." As he said it, I realized something I hadn't before. Revenge hadn't saved us. Truth had. But truth, real truth, always leaves a scar. By morning, the storm was gone, but the air still carried its weight. The sky above Seattle was a pale gray, the kind that pressed down on everything. Inside, our house stood untouched, the chandelier still glittering, the tree still perfect, as if beauty could erase what had happened. I stood barefoot on the cold floor, wrapped in Grandpa's wool coat. It smelled faintly of cedar and old tobacco, like something unshakably real. Outside, faint tire tracks from the police cars cut through the snow, marking where the night had ended. The silence felt wrong. It wasn't peace. It was aftermath. Arthur sat in the living room beside the dying fire, his face turned toward the flames. He looked older than he had last night. A man who had carried justice on his back and found it heavier than guilt. "Grandpa?" I whispered. He turned, his voice low. "Good morning, Claire." "Did you sleep?" He shook his head. "Not the kind of sleep that helps." I sat across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled quietly. The clock ticked on like it hadn't watched a family collapse. "They're really gone," I said. "For now," he replied. "But absence isn't the same as peace." I nodded, staring into the embers. "I thought I'd feel relieved, but all I feel is empty." "That's how justice feels," Arthur said softly. "It doesn't fill you. It clears space so something new can." His words landed in my chest like a truth I wasn't ready to hold. A knock sounded at the door. Ethan stepped in, carrying a folder under his arm. "The authorities confirmed everything," he said quietly. "Conspiracy, fraud, attempted harm, they'll be transferred by noon." Arthur nodded. "Thank you, Ethan. When he left, I asked, "Do you regret any of it?" Arthur's eyes stayed fixed on the fire. "I regret that it was necessary," he said, "but not that it's over." He looked up at me then, and for a moment, the mask of control slipped. "You can't undo what's been done, Claire, but you can decide what you'll build from it." Outside, the morning light crept through the window, thin and cold, but light nonetheless. I hesitated. "Do you think they hate me?" Arthur exhaled slowly. "Right now, yes. But hate is just grief that hasn't learned how to mourn." I didn't answer. My throat burned, but no tears came. The day unfolded quietly. Charlotte arrived to finalize paperwork. Her calm professionalism filled the spaces where chaos had been. Every signature I gave felt like closing another door I'd never wanted to open. At one point, she caught me staring at my last name on the documents. "You can change it, you know," she said gently. I shook my head. "No, I'll carry it. Someone has to make it mean something again." She gave a small nod. "That's brave." By afternoon, the house was empty again. No police, no lawyers, just echoes. I found Arthur standing at the staircase, looking up at the family portrait, the one where we smiled like liars. "I've always hated that photo," I said. He smiled faintly. "Your grandmother did too. She said your eyes were too sad for a happy picture." I think she was right. We stood there, two survivors staring at ghosts framed in gold. "Are you going to take it down?" I asked. "No," he said after a moment. "We shouldn't erase the past. Just learn to see it clearly." Later, we stepped outside. The snow was softer now, melted around the edges. The tire tracks from last night were still there, like scars across white skin. "This is where it ended," I whispered. Arthur shook his head. "No, Claire. This is where the truth finally began." We stood in silence. The cold bit into my hands, but I didn't move. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the faintest flicker. Not forgiveness yet, but the room for it. "I don't know how to love them after this," I said. "You'll learn," he told me. "Forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you, so you don't become what they were." The wind carried our breath into the air like smoke. He turned toward the house. "Come inside, Claire. Let's start again. The world doesn't wait for the broken to heal." We walked back through the door together. The air inside was warm, the kind that feels earned. Arthur's hand rested briefly on my shoulder as we passed the portrait again. "Do you think we can make this house a home?" I asked. He smiled, tired but sure. "We can try. That's all anyone ever does." That night, I sat by my window watching the city lights flicker through the snow. Somewhere out there, my parents sat in a cell, thinking about the same night, from the other side of glass. "I hope someday you understand," I whispered. "And I hope I do too." Behind me, Arthur knocked gently. "Claire?" I made tea. Not for comfort, just warmth. I turned, and for the first time since it all began, I smiled. "I'll be right down." As I left the room, the air felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but beginning. Because sometimes survival isn't about escaping the fire. It's about learning to build something honest from the ashes. 3 weeks had passed since the night everything fell apart. Seattle was shedding winter like an old skin. Snow turned to rain, and the streets glistened under soft gray skies. The world had moved on, but the house still felt like it was holding its breath, as if it didn't yet know what kind of story it wanted to tell next. We started rebuilding slowly. Grandpa and I spent our mornings in the room that used to host lavish dinners, the same room where our family had crumbled in front of a fire. The crystal chandelier was gone now, replaced by sunlight and the scent of wood and paper. We were turning it into a library. "If we leave something behind," Grandpa said, "let it be knowledge, not trophies." Every nail we hammered felt like a small apology to the house itself. The air smelled like cedar and rain. It was the first time I'd seen him build something with his hands in years. There was peace in it, and something sad too. Like he was trying to make amends with time. The world outside still remembered the scandal. Morgan Eyre exposes family betrayal, the house of greed. Each headline felt like someone else's version of our grief. I stopped reading after the first week. Truth doesn't need a spotlight, only a witness. Grandpa refused every interview. He burned letters from journalists, and sometimes I'd catch him staring at the flames, long after the paper had turned to ash. Some stories, he told me, aren't for strangers to understand. He spoke less now, but when he did, his words carried the weight of survival. The fury that once lived behind his eyes had gone quiet. In its place was something gentler, more fragile, the kind of peace that comes not from winning, but from surviving the war. One morning, I found him sorting through old photographs. I joined him at the table and he handed me one, my parents on their wedding day. My father young, confident, my mother radiant, unguarded. They looked like people who believed love could fix anything. "Do you think they ever really loved each other?" I asked. He studied the photo for a long time. "They did," he said finally. "But love doesn't die in a moment. It rots slowly. From pride, from fear, from pretending." He placed the photo aside and looked at me. "If you learn one thing from all this, let it be this: love means nothing without truth." That afternoon, I visited them. The detention center was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. I'd imagined this moment 100 times, but nothing prepared me for how small they looked behind that glass. My father sat stiffly, his hands folded. My mother stared down at her lap. When they finally saw me, her lips parted slightly. "Claire," she whispered. "Hi, Mom." "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I needed to come," I answered. My father's eyes were dull, exhausted. "So what now? You come to show us how righteous you are?" "No," I said quietly. "I came because I didn't want to be like you." That silenced him. My mother's voice trembled. "Do you hate us?" I hesitated. The question deserved an honest answer. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe I did for a while, but hate just keeps you chained to what hurt you. I don't want to live that way." Her hand moved toward the glass, trembling. "Then why come?" "To tell you something," I said. "Grandpa forgave you." My father's head snapped up. "He what?" "He said justice is finished, but healing hasn't begun. He believes forgiveness is where it starts." For a long time, no one spoke. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father exhaled sharply, as if something inside him had cracked. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, voice shaking. "But I want to try. Because I don't want your mistakes to decide who I become." Her fingers pressed against the glass. I hesitated, then lifted my own hand to meet hers. The cold barrier between us said everything words couldn't. When the guard called time, I stood. "Goodbye," I said softly. Outside, the air smelled clean, almost new. That evening, I found Grandpa in the library, reading near the fire. He looked up when I entered, his eyes searching mine. "You saw them," he said. I nodded. "I told them you forgave them." He smiled faintly. "And did they believe it?" "I think part of them wanted to." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You did something I never could, Claire. You walked into the wreckage and didn't let it define you." "It didn't feel brave," I said. "It felt like bleeding in public." "That's what forgiveness feels like," he said. "It's not clean, it's honest." He reached into his pocket and placed something in my hand, a small golden key, warm from his touch. "What's this?" I asked. The key to the Morgan Foundation, it's yours now. I blinked. Mine? He nodded. You've seen what greed destroys. Now you get to decide what we build instead. The weight of it was heavier than I expected. I'm not sure I'm ready. He smiled. Good. People who think they're ready shouldn't be trusted with power. Later, we decorated a small Christmas tree in the corner of the new library. No ornaments of gold, no grandeur, just paper stars, candles, and one small silver bell from my childhood. When it chimed, the sound was pure and clear, echoing softly in the quiet. Grandpa adjusted one of the candles, his hands steady despite his age. You know, he said, your grandmother used to say truth is the only inheritance that grows when shared. I smiled. Then I guess we're rich again. He chuckled, low and warm. In a better way this time. The firelight flickered across his face, softening the lines that pain had carved there. I thought about everything we'd survived, lies, betrayal, loss, and realized survival itself was its own kind of wealth. He rested a hand on my shoulder. Promise me something, Claire. What's that? Don't let what they did make you hard. Let it make you honest. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I promise. Outside, rain began again, steady, cleansing. Inside, the house glowed with a quiet kind of warmth. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt alive. As I stood beside him, watching the fire fade to embers, I realized what we had truly inherited. Not money, not property, but the chance to begin again. With truth, with forgiveness, with the fragile courage to stay kind in a world that wasn't. Revenge may have set everything in motion, but forgiveness was what would let it rest. Maybe we all have a Claire inside us, the part that believed in love, only to watch it break. But what made her story different was this. She didn't let the darkness win. She chose truth. And in the end, she chose forgiveness. Because sometimes revenge isn't about destroying what hurt you. It's about surviving it beautifully. If you were Claire, standing between justice and family, what would you choose? Tell me in the comments. Not to argue, but to share the moment you realized forgiveness can be its own kind of victory.